What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Margolis. I'm the head of community at Lawtrades. If you know what Lawtrades is, we're a legal tech company that provides on-demand flexible staffing solutions to in-house departments and law firms, attorneys, paralegals, legal operations professionals, contract managers, what have you. We're the best at it. That was selfish. I'm sure there's other people that are very good, but I think we're the best. So I have with us, I'm sorry, guys, I do this shtick every time. So I appreciate everyone being here. These two are my favorite guests. Don't tell everyone else who's ever been on this, but I personally enjoy their content. They're huge influencers online. We have Julian and Cece. I'm going to I don't do you guys justice. So if you both don't mind introducing yourselves and what you're doing now, that would be awesome. There, Julian, you want to start?
Okay, sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Julian Sarafian. I graduated of Harvard Law School along with Cece, although she's a bit more wise than I am. I went into practice at Wilson Sonsini on the West Coast for a couple of years before I quit about a year ago. Turned into a content creator on social media to primarily advocate for mental health and also mentor folks and give career advice in the legal profession. And recently launched my own law firm, For Creators by Creators PC, where we specialize in representing content creators and social media influencers. And I'm happy to be here. Matt, thank you for hosting this.
I appreciate it. Cece.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Cece Shia, and I think what Julian meant to say is that I'm just like older than him. So I graduated from Harvard many years ago at this point. I first practiced law at Simpson Thacher and then went to Morrison Foerster, and I left legal practice earlier this year, like in March, to kind of write a book about the very topics that we're going to be talking about, which is just like how law firm culture impacts things like your health, including mental health.
I guess why is such imposter syndrome, guys? Damn. So I did not go to Harvard. Went to Florida State. So I worked in private practice I worked at 3 firms and then I went in-house. And then during that time, I burnt out twice, almost 3 times. And then eventually I stopped practicing. Currently, I don't practice. Obviously, I'm the head of community at Lawtrades. So thank you guys for the awesome intro. I'd love to hear about the environment that you all worked in. And I know, Cece, you worked at 2 different firms, and then Julian, you worked at 1 firm. I'd love to hear those experiences. Julian, you want to? Yeah. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can go first. So I worked on the transactional side of law, primarily with startup companies all the way through IPOs and public company work as well. It was Wilson Sonsini. And, generally speaking, I think the work was high pressure. Clients want things now. They're paying top dollar. And so even if sometimes you feel like the work didn't need to get done this very moment, you had this underlying pressure to deliver quicker and faster and better and stronger, which of course is difficult. As a transactional lawyer, I felt as well that we were on call pretty much all the time. And I think this probably goes for a wide swath of big law, but the hours themselves weren't the most horrendous. I probably pulled 50 to 70 hour weeks if you counted all of my work time per week. But the problem was that it was spread out all the time throughout my day, and that there was not really a clear way for me to set boundaries. And there weren't really many role models by that nature either. Folks taking time off with kids or, going on vacation, going to the gym. It just really wasn't a thing. Everyone's life was centered around work, and that made it that much harder to unplug. So I'll pause there. Cece, love to hear your experiences.
Yeah. So I do think I really used to think that all law firms were the same. And I think career services tends to somehow suggest that they're the same too, right? They're never like, oh, think about the cultural factors. They're just like, go with this. And I was like, okay. So that was, I think going in, I was like, oh, it must be all the same. But having had the benefit of working at 2 firms and like very different groups headed by very different people, it made me realize that the availability is like a major issue, but there were so many things that I think could be done to stem that, to like help with that burden, right? And I think seeing different firms and different partners implement different practices, whether it's like being open to the idea of protected weekends, whether it's just the idea of like sending an email and putting one line at the end being like, don't look at this tonight, this is for Monday. Like that, those little things help so much with the overall management, but they're like little things that when partners are so busy, like, of course, I mean, it takes effort, right? To like think of those little niceties. And the practicality of big law is that people are just so busy that oftentimes they don't think to like implement those things. And I was just like, how it's so crazy that all these like people are so smart, but when it comes to like creating a better environment, creating like a better world, the things that do help a lot just kind of fall to the wayside.
100%. And I'll echo from like my little insignificant law. I just offended somebody. Someone's watching this and was like, what did you just say? So I used to see the same thing. I really echo the point of like, here's an assignment because I'm going to forget it, but do not touch it. Deal with it on Monday. And I do that myself now because I remember being in those scenarios where I'm like, especially because I was a litigator, it was like, hey, like motion for summary judgment needs to be drafted. It's a next week thing, but they would just send it to me and I would get no context. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, it must be done immediately. Especially when you have certain partners too, because there's a hierarchy of like a managing partner or senior partners. You get it from a senior partner. That was what we were advised. Just go, do it, get it done. And like, Julian, like you're saying, it's high pressure. Everything's a high pressure. It doesn't matter what it is. It's always high pressure. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, guys. Like, is it also the nature of law? Like we're all type A personality as much as we pretend not to be, right? So like, I think at some level, we probably put priority on things that probably don't have that priority level, but no one tells us otherwise. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I personally feel like there's a race to the bottom in the legal industry, certainly with big law, where we're competing on the wrong metrics. We're competing on things like how quickly can you respond to a client, because part of why they're paying so much, and this was told to me literally by partners in my old firm, they're paying so much so that you are responsive and you will get things done when it comes through the door. And that's just not necessary. It never has been. The legal work does not need to get done that quickly for a lot of these cases and these issues. And I think on top of that, you add in the billable hour, and the billable hour tying folks all the time to the number of hours that they work and their whole value in the firm. And your whole value as a lawyer is no longer the quality of work that you produce, but it's how long you're actually spending doing it. And it's a recipe for disaster because these firms don't take innovation seriously. The partners are content and they're happy making a lot of money year over year, even though they're making a lot of money using inefficient systems. And so you need smaller players. And I think big law firms on the fringes to hopefully buck this trend, and move against the tide. And I'm sure we're going to get into this later, but that's something I always encourage younger associates to do, is don't fall trap and victim to the status quo of how people act in this profession just because everyone else is doing it. Because at the end of the day, everyone will lose if that is the case.
Yeah. I always think that like, I do think it's true that there like law students self-select a little for being naturally a little anxious. Some aren't, but for the most part, it's a lot of people who liked rules, and now we're going to school to learn about rules. And to like rules that much, you have to be a little bit at least aware of rules, maybe a little anxious about following rules. So the very nature of it. And then law school is 3 years of being told that there's like one way to do things. So it kind of sets you up to like think that there is a correct way to live your life. And it's reinforced by career services, reinforced by professors, like really reinforced by everyone around you. Yeah. So I like the best, or I guess the most well-balanced people in private practice I've seen, they've actually been like really not anxious. And I was just like, so there's a way to do it. I think it's like we almost get off on our own anxiety and we think that like if we aren't this anxious, then we'll fail. And being able to like see more people just like have their life, but also like do a good job. I don't know, that would do wonders. And I do think a lot of it stems back to the billable hour, right? Like your product is your time. And when your time, you can't really like do a better or good job or worse job of your time. It's just your time. So you're just always anxious about how you're going to like get about like putting your hours into the work. And that creates it's just a bad cycle that reiterates again, like now we're at a law firm environment and what is the metric for doing good work? it's billable hours, so it's time. So we're just kind of like perpetuating this, and it takes a while to like step outside of that and realize like, yeah, how can we innovate? Like, what are other ways of imagining this system? But your time is like spent working, so you don't actually get to like think so much about the solutions.
That's a really good point. I like the rule follower thing because it's 100% accurate. And that's what law is. I mean, really, it's just a bunch of rules that we're all following. So it's like, God, it just like, it feeds the beast, if you will. So we had a really good question I wanted to ask you guys. We just received this from the audience. How do you manage to communicate your sentiments to senior management in a way that doesn't come across as negative?
I'm happy to go first on this one. I would always basically do as much as I could and show that I was being very proactive anytime I would ask something of senior management. So for example, if I wanted help on a deal, I would say, hey, like I'm underwater, could really appreciate some help if I get another junior staff in this. I'm happy to go find them. I'm happy to manage them and delegate to them. But I wanted to ask if, that was okay with you first. And in general, I found that people are very reasonable if you're willing to ask in a way that shows that you're proactive, right? And you're getting away from being overworked, and you want to avoid creating poor quality work product, as opposed to just saying, no, I can't do it, et cetera, and leaving things unsaid or up for ambiguity. Always focusing on what I can control and how I can use that to help them usually left a good taste in their mouth, at least as far as I can tell.
That's a good point. And Cece?
Yeah, so I don't know if I ever like directly communicated that I thought things didn't make sense when I worked there, but I think the way you go about it, the way I went about it, is similar to Julian. It's like you have to frame it as just like a huge exercise in managing up, right? Like if you want something to happen, you have to somehow propose it in a way that shows that the ultimate purpose of serving the client or, bettering the firm is at the end of it. And that really resonates with a lot of partners, because it's not like partners want to ruin your life, right? It's not like clients really want to ruin your life. They just are too busy to really think about the ways in which to make your life better. So if you can really just like propose it and be like, hey, I read whatever needs to get done. And then I would be like, I'll propose a work stream. I would just be like, okay, I think we need to staff like X number of people. I think this should be the timeline. And it's all timeline and like a working thing that works for me. So that kind of insulates me already from it. And then of course, if that is like if that's not persuasive to the partners, then you kind of like did what you could. And I would save those like discussions about, hey, I think there's like a huge management problem here, for your exit interview.
You both just combine that's exactly what I wanted to say. So I've been in this scenario too, where I've had it where I've done what Julian has said, which I love that as well, where you're like, I've literally done everything. Like, this is exactly what I'm giving you the options right here. It's a yes or no. I've already set it up for a yes or no. Go for it. And I've had it where a partner has said, no, you were hired to do this. I don't care if you've made it easier for everybody. And in those scenarios, to Cece's point, that's what you say in an exit interview. You say, this is what they did to me. This is the scenario. There are plenty of firms out there. And again, I came from a smaller law firms, medium-sized law firms. It's totally a real thing where you're taking advantage of, even when you put the ball in their court. And it's a perfect layup. So do exactly what everyone just said here. I think I'm going to go in circles if I keep saying it, but try to set it up as easy as possible for your management. And if they don't feel like that's good enough and they hired you to be this workhorse that doesn't get any help, that doesn't get any sort of accommodations, even when you're doing the best you possibly can, it's a conversation to have about management on your way out the door. So I appreciate that response, guys. We have another question. Did you set yourself time management guidelines to make sure you kept a work-life balance? And I'll say preliminarily, I did not. I'm probably the worst at this.
Nah.
I know. That wasn't good advice, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Did you set time management guidelines? Do you have schedules? What do you do to try to delineate work and life?
Yeah. So I did, but I do think that for a lot of people, probably it wouldn't be like considered sufficient work-life balance, but I would make sure that every day I got my workout in, because I knew that's what made me feel better. Also, it like doing some kind of 7-8 p.m. workout, I realized helped me stay up later to work later. It kind of gave me like a second win, which is probably not the healthiest like overall, but it did give me a lot of sanity during the times when I was working a lot. So I would say like all I really did was like I would schedule, I would sign up for classes that I would lose money on if I missed. So that kind of gave me like a whole self-punishment incentive to make sure I got there and actually did it. I would schedule it like, on Sunday for the next week going out. And did I have to miss them sometimes? Yes. But for the most part, like you can take like 1 hour, 2 hours away. Like for the most part, you can totally do that. And as long as you just like communicate it to people, like it usually winds up okay. So I think that was kind of like my thing, was just schedule it. And then that's at least like, 1.5 hours of the day to yourself, which is really good.
Yeah, I want to echo what Cece said about setting aside time and blocking it, because I found that when I didn't do that, I was just consumed by work, because it never really stops. There's always going to be something to do. And so unless I carved out time and I left my phone off, or I turned it off, or I put it on airplane mode, it would infect whatever I was doing, playing video games, going to the gym, eating dinner. I also say that I was pretty proactive in telling my teams when I wanted and had time that I wasn't going to be working. So when I had a dinner on a Friday night, with my fiance for our anniversary, or I was out traveling for a weekend, I would tell them a week, 2 weeks in advance and say, hey, I'm not going to be available this window. You need coverage, let me know. And I found that was helpful too, because at the very least, I could offer coverage and get them help, so that Friday night, I don't get caught up doing some deal that just happens to blow up in my face, of course, during the dinner reservation that I had.
I've been there. That's the worst.
Haven't we all?
I'm glad we could joke about this after the fact. I appreciate it, guys. So I'll get back on schedule for this. So I'd love to hear, guys. We hear about this all the time. Mental health is a big issue for lawyers. I would love for someone to kind of explain, because I think as an outsider looking in, you see, oh, there's lawyers, they're just complaining to complain, right? Lawyers love complaining about things. And that's so false. If anyone wants to jump in and kind of explain what's happening as it relates to, I'm going to call it a mental health crisis, because it really is an issue in this profession.
I'm happy to start. I mean, you have rates of anxiety near 80% in our profession, depression near 40%, and addiction near 33%. That's staggering. I mean, the thing that I wonder, guys, is like, if we put all the lawyers in a room, we look around, like we're not a healthy group of people. Like that's none of those numbers are positive. Any one of them is bad, but all three together is like horrific. And it's like, to me, it's scary, because when I entered the profession, I found that leadership was suffering just as much as the rank and file, just as much as the mid-levels, right? Like no one is winning in our profession from the status quo. And I think it's going to take, to some degree, of course, out of the box thinking and innovative thinking, like Cece and I were talking about earlier, to shift away from things like the billable hour. But to some extent, it's also going to take being a little bit less greedy in the short term by some folks in leadership to decide, let's put ourselves before our clients. Let's stop sacrificing myself and my family vacation and my associates' vacations just to get this M&A deal done, right? Let me give it to a colleague who can handle it very competently. And that takes courage, and it takes working against the tide. So I don't know how that's going to happen or how long that's going to take. I'm happy that, companies like Lawtrades are having folks like Cece and I on to talk about these things, because if nothing else, I think raising awareness is important, because our profession needs to turn itself around. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable for us. It's unsustainable for clients. And if you think about the quality of work that we're producing when we're suffering so badly, I can't imagine it's going to be good.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think I mean, going in, right, I really thought life would be like Suits. I was like, oh, it's going to be like just as glamorous. Like this is going to be so fun. And I feel like with every year, I just saw more and more worrisome things. Like, there was one time in the cafeteria, an associate whom I worked with ran past me, like holding one of those like 24 ounces of water. And she I guess maybe that's a joke, but she said this is the only time I get to leave my desk the whole day. So I have to buy the biggest water I can. And I was like,
Oh,
what? Like, you can't go get water? Like, are you sure? And other things like seeing, I got an email once to like, I was emailing an associate about something, and then they were like, blah, 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 something in response to my question. And then like, I am going under now, anesthesia for surgery. I will be back at 7. And I was just like, dude, get off your phone. Like, I don't know. So
Oh my God.
yeah, I feel like it's like all these crazy things that the more I saw, the more I was like, this wasn't in Suits. Like, this wasn't like where, what happened? And it could be a show. Like, I really do think they're like weird enough that they could be in a show. But I was like, this is not the reality of what I thought it would be, given what I had seen in media going in. And those like little actions made me like really sad, because I think they kind of make like clearly they thought that, like, the job was above all in a way. And I would think that, you know, there aren't. And I think on the other end, though, there were people who really knew how to say no from the get-go, really knew how to draw out boundaries. And I started noticing like a trend that those associates tended to be from like families with other lawyers, tended to like be pretty well connected already. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, we talk about, you know, so many diversity issues in law, but then like we see this happening and perpetuating from the ground up. So I think it's like not just, it's not just like a law firm thing. It's also just like, don't we care about the world? Don't we care about like what we're trying to do overall? And I get that like law is like a microcosm of what's happening overall, but we should still endeavor to do what we can in this like little microcosm that we do have control over, even if we don't have control over what happens in like all of the economy.
I couldn't agree more. We all have stories like that now. I remember hearing this when I started practice. It wasn't at my firm, but it was at a competitor firm, that someone was at like in a hospital bed, around the hospital bed. Their spouse was having their first child, and they got a call from a client. And the client said, "Hey, I've got a case for you." He said, "That's fantastic. I'm currently doing something. This is a huge family event for me." I said, "I'm not paying you to not take these calls legitimately." And instead of, you know, confronting the client and trying to create a boundary like we talked about, walked outside, took the call, and effectively got it moving, got it staffed. And that's something. And I heard that story and I was so baffled by it. But then I started practicing and seeing other scenarios like you're referring to, like about to go into surgery and doing X, Y, and Z. And I think at some level we're proud of it, or at least for some people are proud of that they can be lawyers in any circumstance. And like, look at this, like during this moment of weakness, I still shined and did you know, and was still a lawyer. And I think it perpetuates that negative environment. You can never turn it off. You can never just be Cece or Julian or Matt. You have to always be lawyer. And it's horrible. And I think I'll say candidly, like I've burned out a couple times. And during those times, it was so all consuming as being a lawyer that I'm like, I just don't want to do this anymore. You stop being Matt. I'm Matt the lawyer, not Matt wearing a hoodie, you know, posting on Twitter far too much. So, but legitimately that's the environment that we perpetuate, this like very lawyer, always moving, always going environment. And it's not healthy. It's certainly not healthy. But yeah, that was a great one. I think there's another thing I'd love to hear if you guys have ever dealt with this. And I don't know if it's in other industries. I've heard about it in finance, a bit of a hazing. I've seen it where you do see like you're lower on the totem pole because there is a hierarchy, and folks take advantage of that because, again, you know, maybe it happened to them. So like for me, for example, I once had it where I was told I had to wear a suit to the office, even though everyone else wasn't wearing a suit because I was an associate. And then a partner walks into my office and wearing jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers and says, "There we go, that's right," and walked out. So do you see hazing? Have you ever seen it in big law or in any of the firms, or heard about hazing? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I can start. I don't think I'm grateful in that at my firm I didn't see a ton of at least explicit hazing by way of like, I'm gonna make you suffer, specifically to make you suffer just for the sake of it. I will say that, and this probably goes for a lot of firms in big law, there is a just collective ignoring of things that junior associates and new folks think or prefer or want to be changed. And to that end, the response that we received a lot of the time was this sort of, well, we went through it, so you go through it. Well, it's been done this way, so you're going to do it this way. Not as toxic as like forcing us to wear a suit and being a clown show like that. Like that's messed up, straight up. But still in the same vein, right? Of just like arbitrarily forcing folks to do something because it was done in the past in a way that makes them not as fulfilled or happy, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I always wonder, I'm like, were they just bullied in school and now they now they ascended to power and decided that they should bully others? Like, I never understand why those things happen. And I didn't see anything like as explicit as what you went through, Matt, which I'm sorry, that sounds terrible.
It's a really nice suit. So
well, there you go. At least you had that. But there was a distinct, very like a lot of attention to hierarchy, let's just say that. And that if there were things that junior associates thought or like tried to do, partners would feel pretty free to like ignore or brush off. I remember, I think one of the times I realized exactly my role in the totem pole is like when some partner that you do work for never contacts you, never like they only communicate with you through the mid-level associate maybe, or like, you know, you're invited on something and then I think I got disinvited and he made the mid-level associate tell me. And I was like, wow, you can't even like just send me one phone call. Like it's just kind of this like time thing. And I think that's the major thing is there's a distinct sense of like, it's not that they'll haze you, it's just that they won't have time for you. One time I even offered, like my friend was getting a fund together and I was like, oh, maybe I'll like just try to show this as like a business development opportunity. Sent an email to the funds partner. He left me undelivered, read unclear, but didn't even respond. And I was like, all right, like I'm trying to maybe bring some initiative and you don't care, which is fine. But it does show like, even when you're trying to help the firm, they're like, nah, you're like too senior or too junior for us to even care.
That's exactly it. It's that hierarchy. And like to Julian's point, you have to keep reinforcing that hierarchy because it happened to me. You're right. Like I was an attorney growing up was working in the 70s and 80s and I got my ass kicked, and it has to happen that way because it made me a better person or an attorney and
so like, did it?
Exactly. No, like got your ass kicked and now you've got emotional issues because you got your ass kicked for so long. That's an issue with the industry, and it kind of leads to my next question is, how do we fix it? How do we fix this problem that we have in the industry? And I know that's like a very big ask from you guys, but I'd love your thoughts on it.
I have a couple of solutions that first of all, I think the more competition, the better. So smaller firms like my own, smaller firms started by upstarts and folks who are ex-Big Law who say, I'm going to do similar work, but at a fraction of the cost, and I'm going to innovate on the culture. That's all going to be helpful, although that's not something that's infrastructural that the big law firms can change. In a perfect world, I think a simple solution to take a lot of pressure off would be to prorate folks' bonuses. So it's no longer an all or nothing bonus structure where it's like, for example, 1,950 billable hours and you get the bonus 100% or nothing. Why don't we do 1,300, you get 10%, 1,400, you get 20%, 1,500, you get 30%. Why not? Like, this is literally math. Like, being in Big Law is like the easiest business model to understand ever. You bill a number of hours. You have the expenses, which is literally your salary, healthcare, and staff. It would not be difficult to incorporate something like that. And I think it would take a lot of the pressure off of associates. But unfortunately, I also think that this is going to be something that's going to have to incrementally shift over time as the older generation retires and is pushed out of power. And the younger generation, not really millennials and Gen Z, I would argue, but mostly Gen X, who are just more reasonable, in my opinion, than folks who are even older than them, step into leadership and actually start listening a little bit more and actually start taking, time to actually set boundaries for their folks on weekends and changing the actual top-down culture of what it feels like to be in Big Law. Because at the end of the day, you can be in the industry and working relentlessly hard, but no matter what policy the firm puts forward, if you are working with a partner that is nonstop, it's not going to matter. none of these policies will matter. The bonus thing I just mentioned will not matter. And that's not something that the firms at a big picture level can really change. I think it's going to have to come from individual partners collectively shifting their mindset about it, which is very hard, very difficult to do. But I don't really see a way forward without that happening.
Yeah, I agree. I think the current model, like the way to really change things is like on a partner by partner level. And I think like the individual partners that you work with, they have a huge impact on your work-life balance. And if you work with a partner who's respectful of that, your time is very different than like at the same firm, even in the same group, with a partner who doesn't respect that. And that's it's hard to do anything about that because the people who are going to stay and the people who aren't going to stay aren't going to stay. So there's almost like a reverse self-selection here that's happening that's like not good. But I've thought about this question a lot, I think, in conjunction with like my book, and I want law schools to take a little bit more responsibility for what they're doing and what they're like pushing students into, particularly because the law schools get your tuition, right? They get your money, and then they kind of just like drop you off. And there's almost a symbiotic relationship between law firms and school career services, right? Like law firms pay to participate in on-campus interviews, like they pay. So why aren't we like a little bit more suspicious of that relationship? And I feel like career services, right? They have a responsibility to get you a job, but I feel like they have so much more power than they think even. And if we instituted some sort of like, I don't know, 2-year review, 3-year review, 5-year review, and for firms that like seem to time and time again, like abuse their associates, cause people to leave, in, you know, the exit interview for career services, if that happens over and over, then I think they should get like suspended from on-campus interviews for a few years. Like that's going to hit them where it hurts. Like they are going to wake up and pay attention to that, because what do they need? They need this constant like pool of talent. Like that's their model right now. It was kind of like burn them and lose them, but it only works if there's like a constant pool. So what if you attack that and like give I don't know, just like put the onus of law graduate welfare a little bit more on the law schools that got them in the first place. And I don't know. I think this is something I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Both of you guys, like I didn't think that's ridiculous. I knew you guys were going to bring like truly insightful ideas, but like these are like very practical. I hope someone listens to this, because both sets of ideas would probably change the industry 100%. Bonus especially, OCI especially, because I'll speak to the bonus. For the bonus, I've been in that scenario where it was all or nothing and I never got it. And it killed me. Yeah. And I worked so hard for it. And that was one of the factors of burning out, because I was like, what did I do all this work for? I did it for nothing. And I missed it by like maybe 10 hours, right? 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours. And Cece, to your point for the OCIs, I've seen career services. I'm very excited because this is the greatest ideas I've ever heard, by the way, guys. I've seen career services push people to firms that I've seen, especially insurance defense is known for like kind of a burn insurance, into these kinds of insurance defense firms that we all knew in the industry were churning and burning these people, that were causing them to bill 24, 26, 2,800 hours nonstop. And they pushed them to it. And I couldn't agree with you more. And we all knew a career service knows it. And especially if they're paying for OCIs, I think the ideas are brilliant. I think both sets of ideas are absolutely would help the industry. The only thing I'll add, and I think we all kind of talked about it, is there's certain partners. It doesn't matter what's going on. They're always going to be moving at 100 miles an hour. And some of them are potentially toxic because, again, maybe they grew up in a toxic environment, like grew up as an attorney, or that's just a mentality, or there's something going on personally. I think law firms need more accountability with some of these toxic partners and weeding them out, because as attorneys, we don't have say going into a law firm. We get hired as a summer associate, and then eventually as an associate. We come in and we're like, all right, I work for John, and John I have to work for John. That's it. Like I was given John as my partner, and John is a maniac, and John just wants to work 24/7, 365, and speaks through a mid-level. Doesn't want to talk to me directly, but only speaks through a mid-level attorney. And law firms need to take accountability for these partners and making sure that they don't perpetuate a toxic environment because you have these partners that are, again, just that's what they know and that's what they love. And because sometimes there are firms with tremendous, fantastic attorneys that are mentors that really want to, make Julian into the best deal attorney that's ever existed, or Cece into a privacy pro. But then you have partners like John that don't want to see that just want to work until there's nothing left of John. So that would be my only advice to the industry. But I'm very excited talking right now because what you both just presented, I think is absolutely brilliant. And I wish, and I hope people watching take notice or talk to their law schools or alumni associations, because I think both ideas need to be implemented and would be incredibly helpful. We received a question from the audience, a good question. Do you think the Gen Z coming in now as early juniors and mid levels, do you think we'll see change as a result of that generation coming in?
I definitely think that of who the associates are do matter. It will kind of depend on how comfortable Gen Z is with like demanding change when they work there. Because I know, I'm a millennial. I think our MO was a lot of like put our head down and like do the work. And then like if something went wrong, we'd just be like, okay. And then say it on our way out. And like that was the most that we could do. So it's kind of hard. Like I've always been really impressed with Gen Z's like attitudes towards work and this idea of like, the workplace should respect them in a way. So I am curious whether that will impact. And like I've talked to partners who like are aware that like the talent pool is changing. And when I do talk to them, they're like, I feel like we have to change, but I don't know how. The inertia is so strong. So it'll be an interesting like battle of wills essentially between like this Gen Z attitude towards work and like the inertia of the existing partnership. I know what team I'm on, so I can only hope that it works out.
I'm in agreement with Cece. Like I think it's going to be tough for them, Gen Z, to come in, just as it was for me, as like a fairly younger millennial. I like to think of myself as, when their requests, which are very reasonable, and their friends in tech, right, who are in beanbag chairs and sipping coconut water and like going on a retreat to like redwoods, whatever, once a year. And
I don't have that kind of job. What?
And then you're just getting crushed, and your partners are like, no, we don't want to change the food delivery service because we don't know how, because we're all busy and whatever, just do your job. That's not, I don't think it's going to go down well, but I would hope, that as our generation again gets louder and louder, and those folks at, the lower tiers of power get more focused in what they ask for and more united in what they ask for. I would hope that the partners would listen, but I'm not going to be holding my breath for big law partners to listen, period. That's just my personal take.
Well, so I'll ask you guys this. I have seen, I think, Cece, you've talked about this in the past. There are some firms that are taking notice, right? I think some firms are doing reduced hour programs. I've never been in one of those. I'd love to hear more about these like reduced hour programs these firms are doing.
Yeah, so I was on reduced hours for like my 4th, 5th, and 6th year. And I thought that was like really life-changing and probably the only way I could have stayed at the firm. And what struck me about that was it was so seamless. Like their programming of it was so seamless. It was easy to ask for. It was easy to like implement. It was easy to get. And it was very straightforward in terms of what your hours requirements were then versus at my prior firm. Everyone I talked to was like, oh, reduced hours, it's a joke. Like, you don't really know if you can do it. The way that they like set up how reduced hours works, essentially made it so that it was never beneficial to work reduced hours. They wouldn't tell you ahead of time, like how many hours you needed. At the end of every quarter, they would see what the average hours in your group was and then do like a certain percentage of that. So you only kind of like retroactively knew after the fact. And seeing how these different firms like had different reduced hours programs, I was like, oh, okay, like these are little nudges in either like one direction or the other that makes it easier or harder to do it and makes it more sensible to actually do this or less sensible. So I thought those were, like love reduced hours, but like the implementation really, really matters on that front.
That's interesting. That's frightening. You don't know really what you need until the end.
Yeah.
So it's like, it is a step in the right direction, but it's almost a step in the wrong direction. But it sounds like it could be practical. It could be a way to help the industry.
Yeah, there's at least an awareness of it. And I also found during my research, there's a firm that is giving like 40 hours of billable unplugged time. So I think that's also a good way of doing it, is if you want to encourage certain activities, right, make it billable. So this was always my problem sometimes with like diversity initiatives, right? They'd be like, hey, you do it, but also it's not billable. And I'd be like, great, more time. So being able to, like, if it matters to the firm and they want to push it, if it's like unplugged time, like vacation, then they need to think about making more things billable and really like putting their money where their mouths are.
I couldn't agree more. We have a question from the audience, and I just have to ask because I think it's, and I also saw your TikTok on it. I think I saw both of your TikToks on it on Partner Track. So what is your thoughts on Partner Track on Netflix?
Julian?
I got triggered so many times watching it. I didn't expect myself to get triggered so much. I thought it was gonna be like fun, lively, like Suits, but I think they did a great job sort of personifying some of the power structures and the culture behind big law, especially the way like senior partners are treating associates, just like the total disrespect, where she'll like tell the senior partner something, he'll just hang up, that's it, just like purely, you are here to serve, associate, that's it. You are here to serve, no more, no less. But I thought it was, a well-written show and entertaining, and I think it did a fair job. But I think Cece is probably more equipped to answer this because she was closer to, of course, the New York big law scene and whatnot.
Yeah, so I was shocked by how accurately it did capture corporate big law culture. I was like, oh man, like I've seen all these situations before. Oh, like these are totally like realistic partner asks. This is totally something that would happen. And there's totally like the one guy who's really a jerk to everyone, but has a book of business by virtue of like his family, and like the firm is never going to do anything to him. So like these are all super accurate, and I didn't expect it to be so accurate. Thought that those were like really strong parts. I ended up hating the love story that they try to put in through so much of it, though. So that really took away. So at the end, I was like, oh, you have to like slog through the love story aspect of it to like get to the parts that I think are actually instructive.
The ethics conundrum, I don't want to ruin this. I don't want to spoil this, but the ethics conundrum at the end, like that whole scenario, I was like, I haven't taken the MPR, Julian's gonna make me feel old. I haven't taken the MPRE in a long time. But it definitely like, it triggered the ethics attorney in me where I'm like, wait, hold on. I won't ruin that. I'm not gonna ruin it. So, but I thought it was good. I post memes on the internet. So for me, it gave me some great content. But I appreciate it, guys. Guys, we're wrapping up. I'd love to hear like final thoughts, any advice you have for junior, mid-level attorneys in big law or just generally in private practice.
I would just say go against the tide. Never once think that, everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it too. Because don't forget that mentality when we were kids, at least to me, was told by my parents, hey, if everyone's jumping off a bridge, would you just run and follow them? No, you wouldn't. And yet, metaphorically, we're in a place in the law right now where you have mental health conditions and rates of death by suicide at every single tier and level, including partners who have families and who are community members who just can't handle it because it's not human to put ourselves through this much stress and affliction. So set your own boundaries, don't lose sight of your values when you enter the system. Remember that like any job, a job in big law or mid law or government or in-house, wherever, is a transaction. You're trading energy and time, usually for money. And so at a certain point, if you start questioning if that transaction is worth it, listen to that voice and explore it. Because a lot of the times, I think it is speaking to something that is, bigger than your role in that job and probably where your future actually lies. And that may not be in the firm, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice is always like be more arrogant and more humble at the same time. So like more arrogant in that like you got here, like you are in through the door. Like don't be so scared that they're going to push you out. Like you can go anywhere once you get your foot through the door. And I think there's like this constant fear of like, oh my God, I'm going to like get fired and not be able to get hired again. And it's like that's just not really how it works. See, like Matt and Julian both agree. So I think there's like always this fear of like, oh my God, if I don't have this job, it's going to be over for me. But like, be a bit more arrogant. Like, you got this far, and like there are plenty of places that would want you, so you're going to be okay. And at the same time, like, be a bit more humble about your role within the firm or like your group, right? You might think you're the only person who can do this, who like the only person who knows the facts as well, the only person who can like find things as easily. But also, like, everyone else, like, they can figure it out too. It's not the end of the world if you aren't there one evening and you handle it well, and just like you kind of trust that things won't fall apart without you. Because for the people who've been in the industry for like 20 years, like, they have had like associates that they've relied on quit suddenly. They have like had illnesses, deaths, like it just happens. So you can, I think when you're starting out in your career, you're like, oh my God, like recession, what is going to happen? And like for the people who've been in it, they're always just like, it's a recession, it happens. So just like be a little bit more like humble about like your role in it, and know that we are but like a speck in time, and it's okay.
That was great. That was awesome. All right, guys, I really appreciate it. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of both of you. If you don't know Julian and Cece on social media, please follow them on TikTok, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. They're great follows. You don't have to follow me. I don't provide anything of value. So
All of that is hilarious.
Definitely follow Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you again for all the insight. And for everyone watching, we have another event coming up this coming Thursday. Oh, no, I think it's next Thursday, on how to build a compliance team. We have folks from Found, Moneyline, and Cloudflare. The link to sign up, I think, is in the chat. If not, please look on our LinkedIn page and we'll have it there. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.